Street to Buckingham Palace. Instead, 500 miles they travelled to Balmoral, to that private, secluded castle, which has been a home for monarchs back to the time of Queen Victoria in the 1850s. Certainly, there was also a sign last night when the Privy Council meeting that the Queen was supposed to be leading and chairing was postponed. That would have been happening virtually using video conferencing software, the Privy Council being a group of senior government advisors, but that did not happen. Now, there's no big constitutional problem because that is a delay, but it was perhaps another sign. I think it's also important to reflect the very important role the Queen clearly has provided and continues to provide to Prime Ministers, providing wisdom and counsel, which is valuable partly because of her longevity, because she has spoken to known Prime Ministers through significant times of change, significant times of crisis, and many of those figures, if we talk of Winston Churchill or Anthony Eden or Harold Macmillan, many of those people who've long since left this earth are now figures in history books. People whose decisions historians, school children, university students debate over. It is a sign of her longevity that she's been providing that role for 7 decades, that she is in her 10th decade. I spoke to one cabinet minister in the last few minutes who said it's important to stress the government don't know anything. Buckingham Palace are in charge. They will remain in charge. And this cabinet minister certainly said that the government will know as soon as the rest of us do, as soon as any update comes from Buckingham Palace. If you talk to politicians who've met the Queen and have some sense of her, what they speak of is warmth, a familiar face, but also, Sarah Jane, I think it's important to stress, she remains a bit of an enigmatic figure, and the fact that she is now surrounded by her family in her private residence, where she has relaxed with family over decades, feeds into that picture of the Queen.
We have some very important news. Buckingham Palace has just announced that Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II has died. She was 96 years old. The Queen died just a few moments ago, the announcements at Balmoral. She was the longest reigning monarch in British history and the world's oldest head of state. Her eldest son and heir, Charles, the former Prince of Wales, is now the King. Now, if you're joining us, this was the news in the last few moments. Buckingham Palace has announced that Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II has died. Our royal correspondent, Rhiannon Mills, joins me now. Rhiannon, your thoughts?
So it has just been confirmed via social media, their website, in which the royal family have said the Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. They add the King and the Queen Consort will remain at Balmoral this evening and will return to London tomorrow. This will clearly come as devastating news for the royal family and millions of people across the United Kingdom and around the world. Queen Elizabeth II was a much-loved and respected monarch and a truly unique figure on the world stage, a head of state without equal, admired not just here in the United Kingdom, but across the globe by members of the public, politicians and religious leaders. Many of us will simply not remember a time when she wasn't our head of state, and she was a constant figure in every aspect of national life. From becoming queen when she was only 25, she then went on to become Britain's longest reigning monarch and displayed this unwavering commitment to her country and her Commonwealth throughout what was a truly record-breaking reign. Now, her dedication to that constitutional role was never questioned, but for her family were just as important to her as a devoted wife, mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother. And their admiration for her was always so clearly seen when she was surrounded by her family, when we saw those moments of great national celebration and reflection. It's worth saying that for many, her reign will forever be defined by what was a selfless sense of duty. But it wasn't about her own personal power, privilege, or entitlement. This was a role that she felt that she was born to fulfill. Her quiet and restrained demeanour was always guiding her family and the United Kingdom through what was an extraordinary period of social and political change. But throughout all of that, she was always conscious of keeping the monarchy relevant, and while respecting as well and upholding important traditions, she often showed this adaptability that many will now credit with securing the future of the institution. It is worth saying that her old age really should not detract from the enormity of this news and the huge constitutional change that her death now brings. For nearly 70 years, she was this symbol of stability and continuity, and for so many, always a figure of national pride who really embodied those values of public service and duty well into her 90s, and as we saw this week, until the very end. Now the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth realms will witness a period of reflection and constitutional change, which many of us will never have experienced in our lifetime, as we now mourn the death of Queen Elizabeth II and witness the succession of her son as the new king.
And Rhiannon, we last saw Her Majesty the Queen in public, of course, just 2 days ago, when she asked Liz Truss to form her government to become her 15th Prime Minister.
It was remarkable. We saw, until the end, really, that determination to simply carry on with her constitutional duties. And no, she wasn't able to travel down to London to appoint her 15th Prime Minister, as she had done with all of her other prime ministers throughout her 70-year reign. But she wanted to make sure that she was seen by members of the public to be continuing on with those constitutional duties. And we saw that in practice there, the Queen reaching her hand out to appoint Liz Truss as her 15th Prime Minister. I think that is why this announcement of her death will be such a shock to so many. But over the last 12 months, there is no doubt that we have seen a gradual slowing down, a gradual change in the duties that she felt that she was able to carry out. I think it was important for her to be seen to carry out that handover of power between prime ministers, because we hadn't seen her in public for quite a long time. She'd obviously travelled up to Scotland where she was enjoying her summer break. Previously, the last time that we saw her was when she visited a hospice accompanied by Princess Anne, and that was in July. And we saw with her, she was there once again carrying that stick, because we know over the last 12 months she was having difficulty with her mobility. The palace often describing it as episodic mobility problems, which did mean that sometimes she wasn't able to attend certain engagements. But I think what was striking there is to see Princess Anne alongside her. And that has been a theme that we have witnessed right throughout the last 12 months, is the family being there to make sure that when she felt she was able to go out and meet the public, as she has done, as she did right throughout her 70-year reign, they could support her and they could be there in any way that they needed her. And of course, we had the Platinum Jubilee just months ago, the first British monarch to ever mark that remarkable milestone. And we were wondering around that weekend how much we would be able to see her because of the difficulties that she'd been having. But I think you could see that she wanted to make that effort. She knew the crowds once again had come out to mark that milestone moment with her. But also that Platinum Jubilee was so central in the Queen showing her wishes for the future. There alongside her were those central key members of the royal family that she knew she was passing on those responsibilities to. The Prince of Wales, the Duchess of Cornwall, the Prince of Wales, it has to be said, now our new king, and to the other side of her, the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge and their 3 children. In those images, there was a very clear message from the Queen, a sense of future-proofing the monarchy, as she did right throughout those 7 decades, saying, this is my family, who I love very much, who I trust, who have shown already how committed they are to you, the public, how committed they are to the country and the Commonwealth, and you should trust them when it comes to me stepping back from my responsibilities. Today, of course, though, the family will be around her. They have all travelled to Balmoral to be alongside her as now we mark her death.
Just to repeat that statement released a short time ago by Buckingham Palace, that the Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King and the Queen Consort will remain at Balmoral this evening and will return to London tomorrow. And Rhiannon Mills, our royal correspondent, is still with us. And of course, Rhiannon, this is the way things work in Britain, in the United Kingdom. With her death, we now have a king.
We do. We have a hereditary monarchy. And this, I think, is something that will potentially come as a shock to some across the country. As soon as Queen Elizabeth II took her last breath, we had a new king, and that is her son and heir, formerly the Prince of Wales, and now King Charles. We do wait to find out what name he takes. There is a potential that he may change his name to a different regnal name, but we await that announcement in the next hours, days to come. But in the coming days, we will see the pendulum swing in many ways between mourning the death of Queen Elizabeth II and the welcoming of a new king. We are going to see spectacular pageantry that many of us have never witnessed before. The Accession Council is where he will be made officially the new king, where he will be sworn in. That will gather at St James's Palace. We wait to see exactly when that will take place, but that will formally mark his succession and we will witness him taking his oath, and it is at that moment that he will be proclaimed as king. I think what is striking is that at a time when most people would have retired, he is now stepping into a role that he's spent his entire life preparing for. And we have had a very long time to get to know him as the Prince of Wales, and now we will adapt to him as our new king.
Rhiannon, thank you very much indeed. Let's look at the moment that the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II was formally announced. This is the short statement being brought to the gates of Buckingham Palace. Fixed to those gates and the statement, as you can read for yourself, saying that the Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King and the Queen Consort will remain at Balmoral and will travel shortly to London. That, in actual fact, as Her Majesty has passed in Scotland, Holyrood Palace. And these are the scenes at Buckingham Palace here in London. The crowds gathering. They've been gathering all afternoon since the initial statement from Buckingham Palace concerning the Queen's deteriorating health was announced, that doctors were concerned for her, but she was comfortable. During then the course of the afternoon, the senior members of the royal family gathered at Balmoral, the Queen's summer residence. She's been there, she has been every summer for the entirety of that period, where she received 2 prime ministers in a day just 2 days ago. Here, the crowds gathered, and the most significant change, of course, the flagpole above Buckingham Palace, where the Union flag has now been lowered to half-mast and will remain at half-mast during the period of mourning, as we remember the life, the passing of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II in this Platinum Jubilee year. Rhiannon Mills, our royal correspondent, is with me, and as we take in these scenes and the enormity of what has happened and what is happening, Rhiannon, 70 years on the throne, as I mentioned, the Platinum Jubilee, the vast, vast majority of residents of this kingdom, of residents of the planet, have known no other Queen of Great Britain and Northern Ireland than Queen Elizabeth.
She truly was a unique figure, and the enormity of this moment, not just for this country, but also the world, should not be underestimated. Probably one of the most recognisable women around the world, and a woman who, without fuss, carried on those duties right until the very end. And in some ways, how better for her to bow out than in a week where we saw her carrying out her official duty. We don't know how difficult it was for her on Tuesday to be able to stand there and accept the resignation of one Prime Minister and then appoint another. But you can't forget that it was when she was just 21 years old that she made that lifelong commitment, saying no matter how long or short her life would be, she would always serve her country and Commonwealth. And that was also a pledge that she reinforced when we saw her mark Accession Day to start her Platinum Jubilee this year, where again she pledged that she would continue to carry out that official role. And yes, increasingly her family have stepped in to support her. But ultimately, there is no equal to Queen Elizabeth II. What is remarkable is when you look back and think that this was a young princess who was born in 1926 and wasn't expected to be queen. And then there was this twist of fate when her grandfather died and then her uncle abdicated, her father then became king, and then immediately she was his heir at the age of 10. And it was during, I think, those formative wartime years that really shaped that stoic sense of commitment and selflessness that we continue to see throughout her 70 years. Of course, there was also the twist of fate that her father would die so young in his 50s and she would become queen at just the age of 25. And you have to think back to 1952, at the time when it wasn't a woman's place to rule, it wasn't a woman's place to be in positions of power. She ultimately had to prove herself to the country, to the world, to courtiers, to politicians, that she was more than capable of the job in hand. And throughout that remarkable 7 decades, we would see how she would, yes, respect the traditions of this institution, but would make sure that the monarchy was seen to be adaptable, changing with the times, relatable. And I think you look back at the pictures of her coronation and you see just how young she was, such a beautiful, glamorous young queen, and literally the weight of the country on her as her young son watched on, now our new king. And she talked about what it was like, that moment where she became queen, and the fact that, speaking about her father's
the rally, but once you try to do that, you lose half a second a kilometer. In the second stage, I had the red flag, so I lost some rhythm there as well. And then in 3 and 4, we pushed a bit harder to regain